Hello, everyone, and welcome to Orthodoxy. My name is Andy Schmidt, and I am your host. Today, I got to talk with Tammy Peterson. Some of you might know her husband. Her husband is Jordan Peterson. Jordan's a world-famous psychologist who works for the Daily Wire. He has his own podcast, the Jordan B. Peterson Podcast. He has produced a bunch of different video series and short documentaries through the Daily Wire. Very interesting guy and has been very impactful in my life and in many people's lives. And so Tammy is Jordan Peterson's wife, and Tammy Peterson recently converted to Catholicism. And I thought it would be interesting to have her on the podcast to talk about that. And it ended up that we talked about way more than just that. We ended up talking about architecture. We ended up talking about food and the carnivore diet and the impact that capitalism has had on the food industry and on how humans interact with food and how our bodies interact with the food within our environment that we've grown up in compared to the other environments that we haven't grown up in. And so we talked about, we talked about the carnivore diet. We then ended the conversation by just discussing why Tammy moved into Catholicism and what it was about Catholicism that was attractive and interesting, and why she moved in that direction and even past Protestantism, and why she didn't go all the way to Eastern Orthodoxy. And so we discussed in some ways her testimony and how she came to be a Catholic. And it was a very interesting conversation. It was a wide-ranging conversation, and I really think that people are going to enjoy it. Full disclosure, during the podcast, for some reason, I don't know why, I was recording the audio for myself from this nice mic that I'm using right now. And afterward, I went and listened back to the recording, and my audio was all distorted. It was robotic. It was weird. And that's never happened before. I don't know how that happened. And so I had to use the other audio that was being recorded through my headphones, unfortunately. And so it doesn't sound as good. It still sounds just fine. And I think people will be okay with it. But that's just why the audio is not as good on my end. I don't know why that happened. I tried to restore the audio. I tried to fix the audio, but nothing worked. And it's just a very weird thing because that's never happened like that before to me. So anyways, that is a little annoying on my end, but I do hope that you still listen to the podcast, that you enjoy it, that you learn something new. And yeah, let me know what you think about it in the comments, and make sure you like, subscribe, share this with your friends, leave us a 5-star rating and a review. And I really hope you enjoy this episode. And my wife and I, we got married 3 years ago, and we listened to you and Jordan and Michaela did a podcast on the personalities, and we did that, and it was super helpful for our marriage. Yeah, except for I'm still trying to work through my answer or my big five thing, and we listened to your podcast, and it was helpful to hear you guys talk through that. And so sometimes we'll even go back to that and be like, okay, so they had some of the same issues with like cleanliness and things like that we have. So we're not like insane, we just, so that was really helpful. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit if you want to.
Yeah, we could. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I
like that your blue shirt goes with your wall paint. I like that.
Thank you. Yeah, we actually, so this house is 125 years old, and we bought it like a year ago. Also, I have a 7-month-old in the room next to us. And since the house is old, if she starts crying because she's sleeping, we might be able to hear that. But I also have a 1.5-year-old downstairs who's he's loud. So we might just hear kids in the background every once in a while. But
I love children. I love children, and they play a huge part in, they are everything as far as I'm concerned, actually, to tell you the truth.
Well, you enjoy. I always think it's really funny for me because it was Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, a Jew and a psychologist, who convinced me to go get married, take responsibility, and have kids. And it wasn't. In a lot of ways, it's been frustrating because I think I study a lot of theology, and I think that the evangelical Protestant and more reformed theological framework is the best. I just think it is. But in some ways over the past 30 years, it hasn't produced what I think some of the high church Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy or even Orthodox Jewish perspective has produced, as far as people being responsible, going and having children and doing the right thing. And so,
yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
It's very frustrating.
We've fallen away. We've definitely fallen away. But, I think lots of young people fall away. At about 13, they think, oh, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm just going to go off and do what I think I should do. Yeah. I'm going to leave all this religion and all of that because I don't understand it. I'm going to leave all that behind and see what I can do on my own. And the infrastructure and the, the nurturing church hasn't been so enveloping. And so these poor 13-year-olds have been left to go out on their own.
I agree.
And it doesn't end well. It just doesn't end well, obviously. No. Right?
No. Have you read this book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl Trueman?
No.
Okay. This book changed my whole life. Carl Trueman's a professor of, what is he professor of? Religious studies at Grove City College, but this is not a religious book. He basically begins the book by saying he's going to explore the conversation of how do we get to a point in society in which a man can say they're trapped in a woman's body and the rest of society just agrees with that. How do we get to that? Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's amazing. And so he goes to between 300 and 400 years of philosophy and kind of tracks like Rousseau and Darwin and Marx and Charles Taylor and there's more. I'm trying to kind of rereading it right now, but it all culminates in the philosophy of expressive individualism and the idea that the main primary purpose of life is to express who you are on the inside, not to necessarily conform your life to some sort of outside power that it was historically. And for me, growing up in Madison is such a progressive, just really progressive. And my parents are first generation Christians and their stories were really great, but they both came out of very insanely dysfunctional homes. My grandpa was an abusive alcoholic. So my parents, as I'm growing up, are trying to figure out how to be Christians. You and Jordan talked about how a lot of divorces are 10,000 arguments that didn't happen in a lot of ways, culminating in divorce. And so he said that, and then I said to my wife before I had heard him say that, I said to her when we were dating, I was like, we need to fight and finish the fight basically every time we have an argument. We need to finish every fight because my parents did that. And I don't think that they were doing it on the basis of any principle other than the fact that they believe that God said, you shouldn't get divorced. That was it. So they're just okay. And they actually split when I was in middle school for a little while, and it was catastrophic, and it caused some issues in our family, but they came out of it and they didn't give up on it. And so there was I always had that just inherent thing inside of me saying, you have to fight through all the issues. And then Jordan said it, and I was like, oh, there's some validity to this. And then he talked about the 10,000 arguments thing. But anyways, so Madison.
But we also said when you're in the middle of an argument, you have to, if you can't get through your argument, then you go to your room. You go to your room and you think about it. You sit on the edge of your bed and you say, God, what am I missing? Is there something that I'm missing that I could bring to the table to help what is keeping us apart? And God will answer that and tell you how you're insufficient. And then you can bring that back to the argument. And so your mom and dad may have been doing that in a way that they didn't understand. So they may have split up in order to find out how they themselves were going wrong, even if they didn't know that's what they were doing. That's probably what they were doing. And then they came back together because that is what happens when you go into your corner. Because you're not fighting the old fight. You're finding a new way.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's really helpful because my wife she likes that part. She likes the part where she can go into her room and think through it. And in the beginning, a couple of years ago, I was like, oh man, that drove me insane. I was like, what do you mean you want to stop fighting? What do you, so, okay. So to the personality thing, then my personality says, 0% in disagreeableness, or sorry, 0% in agreeableness, or whatever.
Oh my goodness.
Percentile.
Yeah. Oh, you're trouble for sure.
Oh yeah, zero percentile, and then 1 percentile in compassion, 0 in politeness.
Oh wow.
I'm the worst person.
You're not even marryable, really.
Yeah, exactly. And I tried to work on it because I think, I really tried to work on it because I don't want to be I don't want to be an asshole, to be honest with you. Like, that's not the goal of my life, but I also have a hard time because if I see a problem, I really want to dig into it. I don't want to talk about surface level problems. I want to figure out what's
well, you're
the
not
core
afraid. Also, you don't back off from controversy.
Yeah.
And that can be tricky because I'm like that. I don't back off from controversy, whereas Jordan's more agreeable than the average man. I don't know that he's more agreeable than me because I'm a woman. But in terms of having a wife, I'm more disagreeable because I don't know. I think I think I may have been 6% in agreeableness, like pretty low.
Wow.
My dad was also very, very low. So I inherited whatever his agreeableness was, which was like negligible. Negligible. Yeah. But I appreciated him because he was blunt and I'm blunt. My daughter is blunt. Like we're kind of a blunt family, which makes us into kind of, like you said, not that compassionate of people. So I've had to work on that. But coming to the church and learning the scripture and the virtues has deepened my it's deepened my understanding of how to talk to the people I love.
Sure.
And so and that makes me more kind and more forgiving, right? And that's necessary. And so these personality traits, although they are, I wouldn't say they're fixed, but they're kind of fixed. With proper ethical training, you can be as good a person as anybody else. Yeah.
No, and that the thing that I've noticed, and I've been trying to work on how to articulate it, is that the more that I've been able to articulate my theological positions, and when I'm not using the word theology as like a academic word. I'm more using it the way that my favorite theologian is J.I. Packer, and he talks about how the purpose for theology is to grow your affections towards God. It's to actually know God. You want to actually know who he is and have a personal relationship with, not just to know about him, to know him. And so that's how I'm using it. And I've noticed that when I articulate my thoughts and I learn to articulate the theological positions that I take on whatever it is, it could be the fruits of the Spirit, it could be the teachings of Christ, it could be the book of Romans, whatever it is, I'm learning to articulate it. The more controlled I feel like I can be in, and I have to think through how. I'm trying to still think through how this all works. Is that the more I can articulate a problem or articulate my position on something, the better my life feels to be structured. I don't know why that is, especially in relationship to Christianity. When I read the Bible and I'm saying, what in the world does, Hebrews 6 mean? Where it says you can fall away from the faith. I'm a Calvinist. What does that mean? And then I go and research it and study it. And then I think, okay, well, this articulation has helped create some sort of stability in my theological perspective. And that's actually helped me with the fruits of the Spirit, which in some ways go directly against some of these maybe like low compassion and things like that. It's the fruits of the Spirit, like actually you have to have the compassion. So when I'm able to articulate what that means theologically in accordance with Christ, not necessarily the worldly definition of compassion or the worldly definition of love or peace or patience or kindness, then I'm able to do it. I don't know why that's the case.
Because it's true. That's why. It's good and it's true. Yeah.
Sure.
Right. And that's why. It's profound. It's profound. Yeah. It's nothing we can really truly understand because it's from God, and we don't understand God, and that's just the way it is. We have many, many, many people who've written down really, really important and insightful and inspired verse, and we can learn from that. Yeah. But really, I have a real strong practice of prayer.
Sure.
And that practice of prayer I pray the rosary every morning, and I bring myself to the rosary as humble as I can be, and try to bring my preconceived ideas, my, anything that I'm fighting with, anything that I'm holding on to, anything that I'll bring to prayer that morning. And so before I see anyone, my husband included, before I see anyone, I go through the rosary, and I could spend a little time at the end asking for God's word. And I don't always do that, but I ought to. Anyway, that makes me, puts me in a better position to be present when I do have a challenge, any challenge that comes to me that day. Then I can answer to it in a way that I'm not distracted, so I can see it actually. Otherwise, I might miss it completely.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I'll become confused, and the more muddled I get, the further I am from God. Right. The more muddled I get. But that's why you have to start really defining your positions, is because that brings you more and more clarity. And the more clarity you get with the, and aren't pulled here and there, then the more directly you can be for whatever it is God is wanting us to understand and to do. So it's good work. It's good work.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, how do you do the approach? You said you try to approach it immediately in humility, and like,
well, as soon as I wake up, I say, "Thy will be done." As soon as I wake up, doesn't matter, because sometimes you wake up with a thought or two that has been plaguing you. Something. I chase that away right away. Yeah. I chase that away because that's something, I don't know. It's just not of the highest, right? It's not of the highest. Yeah. So that I chase away, and I say, okay, I'm going to start from you, God. That's what I'm going to start from. And I'm just going to get myself together as much as I can. And then I'm going to go to this place where I can really try to listen and to pay attention, so that the next thing that comes is going to be something that comes from you. That's all. Yeah. That's all I want.
Yeah. So, okay. So if I, is it okay if I add this all into the podcast, what we're talking about right now? Okay. Sure. So let's just get into it, because this is some of the stuff that I wanted to ask you about, especially related to, okay. So the next thing I guess I would ask is then, do you read your Bible every day, or do you read the Bible like a couple times a week, or like you wake up and you pray and you do the rosary? And I'd be interested in talking a little bit about that, because I'm a Protestant, and there's some differences there and disagreement there. But tell me about what your and you just told me a little bit about it. What's your devotional, your daily devotional look like? Do you read the Bible, or no? How does that work?
Well, I want to start, and I haven't started this yet, but I want to do the liturgy of the hours. So I want to spend time with the Psalms, and I want to sing, and I want to sing the Psalms.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like to sing, but I've never found anything I was interested in singing through my life. I mean, I was a little kid. I used to sing. I used to deliver my newspapers and with my girlfriend, and I would sing a song, and then even just maybe one line from a song. And then within 10 seconds, she had to sing a different song, or I won, and so we'd go along. So I sang all the time, and I sing when I walk, or I hum anyway when I walk, because it's good for my breathing and my movement to be synchronized with, in a playful manner.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because that's what you want when you're with God, is a spirit of play. That's why when you negotiate with your wife, you want to negotiate until you have the spirit of play emerge, is because that's when you're in the right place. And so I try to, I try to make sure that I'm in the right place. So let's see, I have a desire to be in the right place, and that comes from my breath, my movement, and my breath and my movement, and that can be song, my breath.
So there's an embodied
so I can
aspect
sing the
to
Psalms, and that'll make it deeper.
Sure.
Yeah, because whatever I can put to scripture, will make whatever I'm doing deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's really what, well, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, and God desires beauty.
Yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting thing, because actually like singing the Psalms is like brand new to me. I grew up in low church non-denominationalism or evangelical free churches. And so they didn't sing the Psalms. We just sang like, I don't know, contemporary Christian music that wasn't really that good, to be honest with you. And so then now I'm in an Anglican church, and we sing the Psalms. It's like, whoa, this is bizarre. Why are we singing the Psalms? And I actually started doing personal devotion every day. I do liturgy. I do some sort of liturgy. And man, that's just been so wild for me to like, to begin to really, it feels so structured, which is really helpful, I think, because I've grown up in the time of expressive individualism and the generation of the worst parts of liberalism, the more negative parts of liberalism. And so everything seemed disordered in my life. And then once I started doing these liturgies, like, it has drastically improved things. And so it seems like your approach is more liturgical. And so I guess, one, you said that you love singing, but you didn't sing much because you didn't like the music. So why didn't you like write? Did you ever write your own music, or did you ever do anything like that? And have you tried that in like writing any Christian music or anything like that?
No, but I probably wouldn't do that. But I might paint, right? I might draw, because I draw and paint more than. I have developed my drawing and my painting, mostly my drawing, more than singing. Although I really like to sing, I haven't really found many opportunities to sing. More recently, I've sung more, sometimes with my husband and with a friend who's a good sound guy. He mixes the music, and he's very good to play with, right? And so we've done some of that, but it also wasn't scripture. But I understand now that I'm just not inspired by anything unless it's religious. Like, I'm truly not. Maybe it's part of my disagreeableness, but I can't find anything musically or even visually that I want to put the time into developing. That isn't like, I was like, what am I supposed to draw? What am I supposed to sing? There's nothing. I don't see anything of worthwhile. And then I started reading the Bible and looking at iconography. First it was Jonathan Pageau, because Jonathan Pageau is he sculpts. He mostly sculpts icons. But more recently, I found a man named David Clayton, and David Clayton wrote a book called The Way of Beauty. Is that what it's called? And A Vision for You. And the Oratory. I think that's the other one. And so there's a whole bunch of dogs here. I hope you can't hear them.
No, I can't.
They're big ridgebacks, and I think there's 4 of them. Anyway, I'm sequestered.
Are they yours?
In the room, so no, I'm staying at a friend's house.
Okay.
Yeah, they have so many dogs. It's crazy. Anyway, I'll see them later. They're ridgebacks, and they're beautiful dogs. They're they're like, they're lion hunting dogs. That's what they were developed for. In Africa, they were to hunt lions. Yeah. And now people have them, and they're like, oh, I'm so happy to see you. And they wag their tail. But like, really, they're lion dogs. So anyway, they're out there.
Wow.
But they're quiet now. So anyway, you don't have to think about that. So David Clayton, I read one of his books on beauty. And he gets into, oh my God, so much detail about how to paint a picture so that all of the geometry is in keeping with what is most beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what
do you mean by that? What do you mean by in keeping with what is most beautiful? Like, and what does the geometry have to do? Well, I obviously know that the abstract painters are not in alignment with what's real and true, right? Or the modern artists, like Jackson Pollock is, all of these people that attempt to do this spontaneous painting. One, it's not spontaneous because it's a I can't think of the word right now. You're planning on doing it. What'd you say? Yeah, you're planning on doing it. So even if you're like throwing the paint at the thing, it's not spontaneous. I don't even know if anything can be spontaneous. But what is it? What do you mean by that? So what's his goal with the geometry? Explain that a little bit further.
Well, if you look at old churches that were built, and cathedrals and things that were built in the Gothic or the Victorian or the Baroque ages, there was a recipe for what they were going to build. And so when you walk into a cathedral, you think, oh, this feels holy, this feels right. And it, in part, like one part of it is the geometry.
Yeah.
How, is it 2/3 and 1/3 from the back of the church, so you go up to where you would stand, and then there's the rest of the church. Well, that's just 1/3 up there, and 2/3 of it was down here. And it feels right for it to be in that formation, for us to be because we want to communicate. Here we are in the church. We want to communicate with God. What makes that more possible? To have everything in its place. Everything. So he talks about the traditional geometry to have everything in its place. I'd have to read it again to really understand it, because it was, it was a lot. So I have to read it again. So he goes through just what makes things beautiful. And I thought the geometry was the most interesting part, just because I think as modern people, we decided that wasn't important. So we built all these buildings, and you think, where's the door? I don't know how to get into this building. It's all glass and I can't even find the door. It's because
or concrete.
It's supposed to confuse us. And it's supposed to say you are insignificant. And we are not inviting you in. You're lucky if you can find your way in, because you are not important. Oh my God, what a terrible message.
There's two things that pop into my head. One, I came to Minneapolis to watch one of Jordan's lectures on, I think it was rule number 8 in the second book on beauty. And he talked about all the psychology buildings in the universities that are like the worst, most hideous buildings. They're like big old, like middle fingers to everybody. And so, that contrasts the maybe the more Christian approach to archaeology, or sorry, not archaeology. What am I saying? Architecture. Sorry. So tell me what you think about this. Is there some sort of, because obviously we're talking about the external architecture of physical buildings. How is there any way that could apply to the personal? We're the dwelling place. Our body is a temple, the Bible talks about, and we're the dwelling place of Christ in us, and the Holy Spirit guides us. And so there's maybe some theological questions that people might have as to whether or not Christians should be spending money on beautiful architecture. I think we should be, because I think that what should be produced out of us in the physical world should probably come from what's within us. That said, what do you think then about how that applies? That's that position that this author has taken in this book could potentially apply to the internal temple that we're told to build and keep and to take care of spiritually and even physically, our own bodies. I don't know if you thought about that.
I can talk to that a little bit. Yeah. Well, first of all, that made me think of fashion. That made me think
Okay.
of fashion
Yeah.
and how interesting that is that we've decided that men can be women and women can be men. So we're going to change the appearance of things, and that's okay because it's arbitrary.
Yeah.
So there's a big middle finger, I would say, that's given to God. And these baggy pants and stuff, that this fashion that came out of the prisons and people adopted as so I can say, oh yeah, right, that's kind of like a middle finger as well. And so there's, so I'm not sure I know exactly what's right and true, but I would think that paying attention to our physiology and our and our bodies in the way that they are, we have this waist. So if we have a waist, then at the waist is where there should be cinching, not somewhere else. And so there, and then we have these shoulders. So and the shoulders should be back. So whatever we wear should support that. And so there's all these things and backpacks, should be wearing backpacks on our backs? Well, not if it's making us lean forward like that.
Right.
That's probably not good for us because our body is our temple and we're supposed to stand straight, and as George says, stand straight with your shoulders back. But that's biblical, that whole idea of standing up straight because we're not cowering, right? We're not going to, because we are trying to be as true to God's word as we can stand tall. And so that's part of the contract that we are making with our personal relationship. So there's that. But then there's also, this is so interesting, and I've just come to kind of understand this recently. So, Jordan and I and Michaela changed our diet to only meat, right? That's what we eat. We eat steak and we drink water, which is about as close to a monk as you can get. Because it's just so, it really does leave everything up so that you have time for everything else.
Oh,
because our societies have, for some reason, decided that it was funny, women have been in the home cooking for centuries, but the cooking maybe, and then we started cooking everybody else's food. So then we had to be looking in books to see how to do it because people just used to cook what was in their garden and what the hunters brought home and stuff. That's what we were cooking. But then we had to be more creative, right? We had to be more creative. Oh, and then we have to become, this is almost part of this identity. I'm just kind of riffing here, but
yeah, go ahead.
What if we can eat like the Spanish do? Oh, well, what if we can eat like the Croatians do? Oh, so then take on their identity. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to put their food inside us. So we're going to actually make us into Croatians because we're going to eat their food, or Koreans more likely. So we're going to have Korean food and we're going to eat like them, or Vietnamese. I mean, that's really good food. We're going to eat that food and that's who we want to be. And then what does our body think of all of that? Because, if you supposedly, I'm not sure this is true, but if you eat honey from the district where you grew up, that honey can be medicinal.
Seriously?
But not all the other honeys, just the ones where you grew up.
What? So where's I believe you. I'm just wondering, like, where's that from? Like, is that like a study that they did or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's been studies done on honey, so you could look into that. I'm not quite. Michaela's making this toffee out of honey.
Okay.
Somehow that she's going to market. It's quite yummy, but it makes me just crave carbohydrates, so I don't eat any of it. It drives me crazy, so I don't eat any of it. But it's really, really yummy. Really, really yummy. And she told me that honey from the district where I grew up would be most healthy for me to eat. And actually the honey from the Peace River country in northern Alberta is just, it blows my mind. It's very creamy and very, very good, the honey that's from up there. But that's how I feel about it. And I grew up there, so it's no wonder I feel that way about the honey.
Yeah.
And so we don't know what it is we should be doing with our food. But as far as I can tell, too, we've made, and there was a big conference right this weekend there was I guess it was small. There was a small Senate discussion, a round table in the Senate, and there were 1,400 people in the other room watching and listening. So it was interesting to everyone, and hopefully everybody on the Hill has understood how interesting it is to people that we are paying attention to the food that is in the grocery stores. But as I was saying, like, women were at home cooking meals, and then it got complicated because everybody was eating food from different places, and you had to have books, lots and lots of recipe books to try to understand how to do all these things, because it wasn't in our folklore, it wasn't right in our family. And so it's no wonder women left the home eventually, because it got all confusing. It got muddled. As it gets further away from God, things become muddled, right? So all of that mixing of even just food from different cultures started to confuse women, and they thought, maybe I could be more useful if I was just doing something else. Like, who knows?
Well, no, I have okay, tell me if this makes any sense to that then, because we were talking about the book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, and he talks about the history of the philosophies. And then one interesting thing that he breaks down is that the assumed philosophical perspective of most people throughout all human history is a mimetic worldview, that we conform our lives. We are at the whims of nature. We don't control nature. Like, the nature isn't made up of just raw material we can do whatever we want with. It's actually, it imposes itself upon us, and so we have to conform ourselves to it. Over the Industrial Revolution, that in some ways was produced by a mimetic worldview through the American Revolution, that then brought about capitalism, and then the Industrial Revolution, people started to then switch their, not consciously, but unconsciously switch their philosophical understanding to the poetic worldview that thought, well, actually all Earth is just made up of raw material, and we can create whatever we want out of it, which ends up producing the transgender ideology that is now we have. But in the 1850s on, we start making, cars and engines, and now we have phones, and it's like, you look around at our world and it's like, we can do whatever we want. We can make whatever, we can go to space. And so that kind of changed the presuppositions that everybody had in culture. And I wonder, there's some of the negative aspects of capitalism, right? And I think maybe you're talking a little bit about that the locality, the local reality that people, Jesus himself didn't travel 100 miles outside of where he grew up. And so, like, we should probably think about that as Christians in some capacity, not just in relationship to the people that we're around. I think that's really important. But now you're bringing in a different aspect to, well, it's actually the food, it's the culture, it's all of these different things that you're growing up around that are tailored to you specifically because it's part of your heritage. And G.K. Chesterton wrote a essay about this on cheese, and it's called Cheese, I think, like it's something like that. I'm trying to write a script about it because I'm working with a guy on potentially writing a script on G.K. Chesterton and turning it into a TV series, because I work with a film studio, and we're trying to make actually good Christian content, which is difficult these days. But like, I'm working on a script with G.K. Chesterton, and I'm taking this essay he wrote on cheese, and he's kind of pushing back against certain amounts of capitalism, because what it does is it extracts the local magic, the local beauty out of. He mentions, like, if I want a taste of London, I can be anywhere and go taste it. But he said, but it's not like tasting it in London. It's a different thing. I can go somewhere else and taste a different place, but it's not the same as being there. There's this sort of magic, and I'm probably doing a bad job of explaining this, but
no, that's pretty good.
There's a magic. There's a mysticism, whatever it is, whatever we want to call it. That, and I don't want people to think that I don't like capitalism. I think that it's done a lot of really good for our world, but there's been aspects to it that we haven't even really begun to think about, a lot of people in our society, how it's actually negatively impacted us. Thinking about, like, people just get up and move 300 miles away from their family, and we can do that because we have planes. But because we can doesn't necessarily mean that we should. I don't like, having family around is important. Like, for me, I have 2 kids, and my parents live 20 minutes away. if they didn't live 20 minutes away, life would be a lot more difficult for us. So anyways, yeah, I don't know. What do you think about there is something to, I think, the local aspect of the human life. And so do you think Christians should just kind of, in food and in travel, how should we deal with that? And it's kind of,
well, there's this brings us to community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how important community is, and how we know who we are by the feedback we get from our community.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we get to be 18 and then we decide we're going to move. And I moved from Northern Alberta to Montreal, 3,000 miles away.
Wow. Okay.
And to a different culture, because it was French Canadian, right?
Oh,
and I grew up in a more Germanic. Northern Alberta was all German, Russian, Ukrainian, Polish area, right? And then I moved to French Canada. And that's when I first got allergies.
Oh, interesting.
I actually went to emergency. I said, I don't know what's going on. I can't even breathe. She said, those are allergies. And some lady I was living with had a cat, and I was very allergic to this cat. And then I got allergic to spring trees. But I had moved 3,000 miles, and my system was just like, what? What are you doing? And how did you get here? Right? And I don't know if I can keep up. My body just said, I don't know if I can keep up. And so, my husband and my daughter and I just eat meat. And it turns out that meat is not inflammatory, right? And so, and all these plants that we eat, and maybe we were meant to live in one place and deal with the plants that grew there, and maybe we could eat those. Maybe. I don't even know if that's true. But now we move everywhere and we eat plants from everywhere, and our stomachs can't handle it. And that's what they were talking about in this roundtable at the Senate, is like, people are sick. Plants are causing dementia and diabetes and cancer and like all of these chronic diseases. Why? Like, why? Well, mostly we've processed them and ultra processed them and made them into a commodity, and then said, oh, you could eat this. That doesn't sound right. We shouldn't be eating commodities.
And it tastes good.
We'll put a lot of sugar in them, and then they'll eat them. I've even found table salt, iodized table salt. If you look on the package, it says sugar. So they've even put sugar in the salt. When the sugar is in the salt, it's gone too far.
We've got a problem. Yeah.
We got a problem.
So do you regulate that?
But it's confusing. It's confusing, and I think it confuses our minds and it confuses our bodies.
Absolutely. Yeah. How do you fix that? Is it just a personal thing? Like actually my family has major health problems. Like my dad and actually my wife said, you need to talk to Tammy about the carnivore stuff, because my dad is constantly sick. He's constantly sick.
That's not good.
And well, it's not good. And he's trying to figure it out. He's in process of elimination. I've been telling him to do the carnivore, but I personally, like, if I eat, oh man, I love pasta. I love it, but I can't eat it really anymore.
The pasta loves you too. I think it's more that way.
Yeah, it probably is. Yeah. I do. I just
think that you love it, but actually it loves you.
It's an unhealthy relationship in many different ways. So I stopped eating. So here's the thing. Here's a bizarre thing. I did the carnivore for like 2 weeks, maybe a couple of months ago.
Good for you.
And I'm not joking. I lost like 12 pounds.
Holy crow.
For people, like, this might be a little bit gross or whatever, but like, I think I had a bunch of like poop in my system. I just think that's what it was. And I think I was just backed up, and the carnivore diet. Well, it was meat and then sliced apples. I added apples. I got to have something that tastes like, after a couple of days of the meat, and I'm sure that's an emotional coping mechanism, right? Like, because when you grow up, you kind of use food as a way to like get out of.
You do that, but I don't know if it's all emotional. I think it's also your body was being driven by glucose, right? The metabolism in your body was neogenesis. So it was glucose. That's everything, your brain, your heart, everything, your muscles, everything. They were using glucose, and they were searching for glucose all the time, because so that's why it asks you to eat all the time. You think, oh, there's something I want to eat. It's always like that, right? But then you change to meat, and it's like, no more glucose? Are you kidding me? The body goes, are you bloody well kidding me? There's an apple. Eat it. Eat it.
Yeah.
Because you need that, because we need some sugar in this system. And so what I tell people to do is, if you're going to try, and I would do it for your dad, I'd do a lion diet. I would just do ruminant animal meat. For chronic disease, ruminant animals, bison, cows, lambs, mainly. Venison.
Okay, cool.
The problem with those is they're not as fatty as beef. Beef has a good ratio of fat to protein.
So you want the fat.
It's the fat that you're metabolizing, not the protein.
Oh, okay. So
it's sugar over fat. Those are the two energy foods, sugar or fat. But your brain and your heart prefer fat.
Okay. Well, I didn't do that then. I was doing venison because I went hunting.
Oh, no wonder you needed something else to eat.
So
you weren't getting enough fat.
The last 4 days, though, I've done beef, and it's been
and that's
better.
What people end up doing. They're like, oh yeah, this feels better. Yeah, and so if you eat beef, and you get a meat slicer and buy a good chuck roast and slice it real thin, and then put salt on it and dehydrate it in the oven. That's nice and crunchy, so it's a nice crunchy thing to eat, because you get and also it's a snack. Which you don't really need, because after a while on meat, you don't crave anything, and you don't have the insulin spikes, so you don't feel you got to eat. You get to a point where your stomach's going roar, and you think, oh, wow, I should probably eat something. It's been like hours. And so you should eat something. But your mind stays completely clear, and that's what most people, that's the most outstanding feature of this meat diet, is people say clarity of mind.
That's totally true. It's bizarre how true that is, because this is embarrassing to admit, but I did 4 days, 3 days of just meat, and then yesterday I was at work and they had like a bunch of pizza. It was ridiculous, and I love pizza, and I ate the freaking pizza, and then I can tell today I'm even more groggy, but like the last the days before that, I felt sharper, I felt quicker. And it's just weird how quickly that happens, and how clearly you can feel the difference. And it's like, man, you feel like when you start doing it, your whole life was a lie. Like you're like, how much time did I waste feeling?
You get out of the matrix. I think that when you're eating meat, you get outside the matrix, and something that I call children who eat sugar are sugar monsters, because when parents feed their kids sugar, and most parents do, when they don't have sugar and they ask for it and you don't give it to them, they turn into monsters, right? But that's the sugar in them that's making them do that. That isn't who they are. It isn't who they are. And so we create these sugar monsters, and then we grow up to be sugar monsters. And then we end up being kind of foggy brained. And it's no wonder everybody's lost now, because everybody's kind of foggy brained, and they don't have the energy either to like think it through. And, Jordan's always like, think it through, and you have to argue until you've come to resolution and all of that. And that all sounds good, but he only eats meat and drinks water. So he has the drive and the constitution and the patience to do that. But when you're eating all kinds of things, you have this niggly pain all the time, and you're kind of tired, and you wish everybody would just stop bothering you. That's all sugar. That's all sugar. It's kind of weird, but I think what we've done is we've processed carbohydrates to death. So we've made them into something that's not even food anymore. These ultra processed carbohydrates. Now we're thinking of doing that with meat, and everybody's like, oh my God, we can't do that. It's like, well, what do you think you did with plants? So it was the obvious you were going to get to the meat eventually. But it is a bad idea. It's definitely a bad idea. But these ultra-processed carbohydrates that we give to kids in schools for school lunches and stuff, that's criminal. It's criminal. And it's poisoning. It's poison. It makes
One way to fix
sick.
that. One way to fix that is just by getting rid of the public school system, which might not be so bad, anyways. I have to ask you this because I've got 2 young kids, and we're trying to figure out what do we feed them? Because you're right, we don't want to have a bunch of cookie monsters and sugar monsters when they get older.
Right.
And so, if you could go back, because I obviously Michaela had all the health issues. If you go back knowing what you know now, what would the kids' diets been as little kids, even into their teenage years? How would you have managed that?
Well, like no grains. I wouldn't have given them any grains at all. In fact, I gave up grains when I was 40. Michaela was maybe 9, but nobody else in the family, they were happy for me that I was feeling better, but they didn't take it seriously for themselves. Yeah. But if I could have done it over again, I wouldn't have given them any grains at all, because grains, plants, if they had legs, they would run away. But they don't have legs, so they put poisons in themselves, so we won't eat them, so that they can be replanted in the ground, because that's what they want to be, is replanted. Now, there's fruits have little seeds in them, and if someone eats them, then they poop them out, and then they grow new plants, and they're happy about that. So there are different kinds.
What did you just say about the plants? They produce poison?
They have in the seeds themselves. They're bitter, right? They're bitter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not good for us. That.
Really?
No, it's not good for us.
Do you think that's a result of? Now, this is a bizarre theological question. So, is that a result of the fall? I think pre-fall in the garden. Now, I don't know if you actually think the garden is real, but I'm like, I think the garden was real.
Let's pretend it's all real right now.
Let's pretend it happened. That. Yeah. Yep, yeah. We decide that. Do you think pre-fall then that the plants were operating for the purpose, maybe its teleological purpose was to be eaten rather than
maybe it was for healing. Maybe the plants are for healing.
Yeah.
Right? Because they are healing. People, you can make tinctures and oils and maybe in small amounts you can eat them, and they can be helpful for your, like for rose hips for vitamin C in your body. And so if you need more vitamin C, then so there's probably there are definitely medicinal uses for plants, but I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to be eating them like we eat them now. Like that's just not healthy. It's not healthy.
Like salads, so if I had little kids,
even salads, but I was sick. I was a sick person. But I think that everybody, if they eat this way, will be sick by the time they're 45. Mm-hmm. They will start on their chronic decline. They don't even, they've changed how much sugar, they change what your blood sugar should be as you get older. Thinking that you should, they say when you're 20, it should only be this high. It's like, okay, you're healthy. But when you're 40, we'll put it on, it can be this high, and that's okay. But that's a lie. Like, that's a lie. Why did they change that? Mm-hmm. Why did they change that? So they're making it seem like we can eat sugar, but we can't. So your doctor may tell you you're healthy at 45 because your blood sugar is what a 45-year-old is. But if you were 20, they would say, no, that's bad. Mm-hmm. That's bad. Mm-hmm. And so they're not exactly reporting the true values of these things. And so if I had little kids, I would, first of all, when they were tiny, tiny little, I would give them a slice of my steak to suck on, and they could crawl around with a piece of steak and learn with their tiny little teeth to rip a piece of steak off. And
so you would do like the child-led, what is that called? Child-led weaning? Or I don't remember what the name of it is. Is that kind of what that's called?
I don't know. I don't know what that's called. I don't know what that's called, but I do know that Michaela's little kids, they got meat first, and the little one who's now 7, she would crawl around with a little piece of steak, and she'd stop every now and then and rip off a piece and chew it and then crawl around some more. And she just had a little piece of steak. And her little guy right now, who was premature, so he's still drinking milk mostly and not eating, but he'll suck on meat, and he's quite happy to suck on it. And, and then there's bone broth that you can make them a soup out of steak. So we put a couple of steaks in a pressure cooker and cover it with water and put salt in it and cook it for 50 minutes. And that's soup. And I think it's quite delicious. And little kids like it too, especially if they're not eating sugar, because they're not looking for glucose. And their brain, if their brain and their heart need fat, well, then that's what you want to give them, because they're developing.
Sure.
And it makes their jaws strong, right? You've read about the dentist Price in the 1930s. He wrote a book. His name was Price. He wrote a book about really about jaw strength from eating meat, and that if you give kids soft food when they're young, then they end up with jaws that are malformed. They're that means, your chin isn't as prominent and your jaw isn't as prominent. And then, and you need braces. If you give kids a heavy diet, then you don't even need braces, because the teeth all come in to chew the meat, and they know where they're supposed to go. So they come in and everything is strong, because there's a force there that they are contending with. And so it informs your physiology to properly grow,
adapt. Interesting. There's like a million questions I have, but the first, I think the most important one is, what in the world do holidays look like at the Peterson family then? Are you just all eating steak and everything? Like, I think about Thanksgiving and Christmas. It's like all the food is great, but you all like the joke on Thanksgiving is you just feel completely miserable after you eat. And so I like, is it worth it? Probably not. So what is it? Yeah. What does the holidays look like?
I can cook a turkey dinner for my friends, but I'll eat a steak.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the same, it's the same sort of thing.
Well, George, he's a very hospitable person. His mother was a very hospitable host.
Really?
Oh yeah. Just really very good at bringing people to the table, very good at that. And so when we enforced this diet on my husband, my daughter and I enforced this diet on my husband, because he had chronic stuff, and it was going, we were going to solve that problem for him. He fought against it for years, actually, and didn't believe in this diet as being necessary. He thought it was maybe he thought it was necessary, but it was evil. He didn't. Because when people come over, he goes, "What are we going to feed them? What are we going to feed them?" Well, you know what, Jordan? They know that all we eat is meat. So when they're coming here, they're thinking, "I'm going to get steak." That's what they're thinking. But he doesn't believe it. He believes that, you have to buy them dessert, and they never eat any of it. They never eat any of it because they don't want it.
It's like what C.S. Lewis says. The government is a necessary evil. And it's like, that might be the case with the carnivore diet too, in some capacity.
Yeah, it's a necessary evil. But the thing is, if you eat it, if you don't eat, say you decide you're going to fast one day, so you're not going to eat anything. And fair enough, you can do that if you want. But then you walk by the corner store and you think, geez, a bag of chips would sure be nice. Or maybe some Haagen-Dazs ice cream or something. It depends on if it's sugar or salt that you're looking for. But then what you have to think is, wait a minute, I haven't eaten today. I probably just need to go home and have a steak. You go home and have a steak, and the idea, those thoughts of those things, they just fly away.
They leave,
They're gone. They're gone. So the only time that you will crave those carbohydrates is when you're tired and you haven't eaten enough that day.
Wow.
And I tell people when they first go on this, and I like the lion diet, in particular, if you have chronic disease. If you don't have chronic disease, you can eat. If you can find, try to keep the sugar completely out of your diet. So bacon has to be sugar-free. And if you eat sugar-free bacon, you might as well just eat a pork chop, because it tastes just like pork. It doesn't, the taste of bacon is all the maple syrup and everything in it,
Yeah.
So and you can't really do that. So if you're going to eat eggs in the morning and maybe some cheese, if you can tolerate cheese, that's a good breakfast, and that's a good breakfast for kids too. Like my son has a pretty normal diet, but his kids don't get any sugar in the morning, especially because in the morning, if your kids only eat fat and protein in the morning, so no glucose in the morning, then their blood sugar stays constant for the day. But if they start out with a piece of toast and peanut butter in the morning, then the insulin is always having to recalibrate through the day. So first of all, I would have done only fat and meat in the morning. That's what I would have done for my kids, for sure. The rest of the day, I would have encouraged them to continue that. But if they were healthy and they wanted to have some carbohydrates later in the day, then, so be it.
Yeah. This is, well, yeah. So now, I mean, that is helpful. And I worked, I think you might know who this is. I know Jordan Peterson interviewed him on his podcast. Dr. Scott Jensen from Minnesota. He ran to be the governor of Minnesota, and I worked on his campaign a couple of years back. And he spoke out against the primary cause of death and then the secondary cause of death on death certificates in Minnesota. The Minnesota Department of Health was saying if they have COVID in their system, you should put that as a primary instead of the secondary, and kind of lie on the statistics to conflate things. And so now we don't even know what happened. And one of the things over COVID that I think a lot of people recognized was just how corrupt the medical industry is. And this is true about exactly what you're talking about. Because when you say to people, you should just eat meat, everybody's like, no, that will kill you. That's bad for your heart. And there's all these arguments against it. Now, the testing that they've done, or the studies that they've done, they haven't necessarily studied people who have exclusively eaten meat, right? Is that correct? And they've studied people who have eaten, is it primarily eating meat, but they still could be eating all this other stuff. And so their health could still be, like, after a certain period of time, they could be worse off because they might be eating like McDonald's and other things with the meat. And so they're not doing, I don't know what all the technical terminology is for these studies, but the studies seem to be in some capacity corrupted. And then the rhetoric is corrupted. And then, like you're saying, you go to your doctor's office and they're saying, when you're 40, your blood pressure should be like this, but in your 20s, it should be like this. And you go tell people you shouldn't listen to your doctor. Then people start getting weirded out because they're like, what do you mean I shouldn't listen to my doctor? So there's this super intense and very intense argument happening right now between the people who during COVID recognized that we have some major problems in the elite class in all areas of life, not just the medical area. But this is just creating this bizarre, and it's not very bizarre. It's actually, we know why this is happening, but just this war between people like yourself and Jordan Peterson and Michaela, who have popularized this in a lot of ways, and the medical industry, who just calls everybody crazy, who just doesn't agree with them and thinks you're a conspiracy theorist. So first off, why do you think that is all happening in the medical industry, as far as convoluting statistics and weird studies that don't really give you legitimate answers to questions? Why is that happening?
Well, when a student goes into medical school, they're not taught anything about diet, like nothing, right? Okay. So that's one thing. So they don't know anything about nutrition. That's one thing. And the other thing is that they're taught when a doctor comes out of medical school, like they are going to help people. That's why they went into medicine. They want to help people. But when they get in the office, it's like, oh, okay, now what's going to pay the bills? Well, we're going to have people come in. We're going to have 6 minutes with them. So we're not really even going to listen any longer than we have to. And we're going to give them pharmaceuticals to deal with whatever it is that they come in for. Because pharmaceuticals are the leading force in our medical system. Yeah. And they're marketed to doctors all the time. This new drug and that new drug. Yeah. I heard a couple of doctors that are kind of known as carnivore doctors recently on a podcast who are saying, really, it's getting to the point now because, Michaela, I can't remember how many, 30,000 people that she has on her platform that have all tried this diet and are all healthier. Like, that's getting to be a lot of people.
Yeah,
right?
it is.
And so doctors are saying, like, there's evidence now that this meat-only diet is helpful to people when they have a problem that is going to need medication. And I don't mean a broken leg or or something, or a cut that needs stitches. Yeah. I don't mean those things. Yeah. Like, those things, doctors, we gotta get doctors' help for those things.
Yeah.
But when you're getting up every morning and you're feeling like, oh, so I'm not awake, and I'm not clear, and I'm not motivated, and like, if you're having these kinds of things and you go to the doctor and they say, here, I'll give you, maybe you're not sleeping well, or maybe we have to give you some Adderall to wake up, or maybe, so there's all these pharmaceuticals that they give them. Maybe what we need to say is, if you're not feeling well and you don't know what it's caused by, and maybe just simplify your diet. And I would, when I first tell people to simplify their diet, I say eat meat and berries and greens, but nothing else. And that way you don't have this keto flu that some people get from this high glucose diet all of a sudden, and then to a ketone diet, which is just based on fat. So they have just a little bit of carbohydrates there to help the transition, and transition just to meat over a couple of weeks and see if the symptoms go away.
Yeah.
It's an experiment. See if the symptoms go away. If then you have no symptoms, it's because there was something that you were eating that was causing your trouble. If your symptoms are still there, then come back to the doctor and say, I've simplified everything. It's been a month and I still have the same problems. Maybe it's depression, right?
Sure.
But if the depression goes away, then maybe it was something you were eating. If it wasn't depression, then maybe it's how you're living your life. Maybe it's right.
Yeah.
And maybe that's depressing, and it might be.
Yeah.
But this way you only have one variable: water and meat. Couldn't be simpler, because the way we eat is so complicated that there is no way. Like your dad, you said, he's trying to do an elimination diet. It's so complicated. It's very difficult to find what's going on. So the best thing to do, we have found, is to go right back to meat and eat meat only. And I would say beef, and I would say rib steak, or New York, some pretty good fatty cut. And I get my steaks cut about an inch thick. Otherwise I have to eat 2 steaks. And so, so I might have a steak in the morning, and I might not eat the rest of the day for a couple of days. And then I might want to eat three steaks a day, but then I might go back to eating 1 or 2. So you're not very hungry, and then one day you're kind of hungry, and then you're not very hungry, and then maybe you get, so it's kind of like that's why it's a lion diet. You know how they eat, I don't know, once every 3 or 4 days, they just eat a whole bunch. They eat a whole bunch, and then they just don't eat.
Yeah.
That's more like what I live like now, is I eat and then I don't, and I don't have to.
And it probably changes your entire, I think now that you're talking about it, I think about how much time Americans, even myself, think about eating. It's like, we have to eat breakfast, we have to eat lunch, what are we going to eat for these things? Where are we going to go? Are we going to go out to? Are we going to stay home? What are we going to cook? It's a lot of time out of your life. And it's not
a lot
like
of time away from God.
Well, right. I was going to say that there's an aspect to eating that can be communal and good, but there's also the reality that if you're thinking about eating that much, how much time are you not being productive in other areas of your life? And that's probably, and like we're saying, obviously divorce rates are very high, and obesity rates are also very high, and, correlation doesn't mean causation. You don't want to draw too many conclusions, but if people are thinking about the wrong things all day and not thinking about the right things, and don't have the energy to work through the real serious and actually more important problems in life. I mean, whether you're going to eat steak or fish, like that's important, but it's not as important as whether or not you're going to get divorced. Like, that's way more important. And so just eat the steak and then figure out whether you're going to get divorced. Right. So I think this is a more comprehensive philosophy around food that it seems like you're bringing up, that is Yeah, if you can figure out, if the carnivore diet works for you, then basically that frees up a lot of energy and time to deal with things that you probably should have been dealing with for a long time anyways, but you weren't because you're eating like crap and your whole mind and body and everything was not really into anything that you were doing. That is, yeah, man, that's like that. I definitely can see where that's coming from, especially because there's the aspect of taking full responsibility, taking on the responsibility for your life. And I think that you guys are right, but it's really hard to convince people that that's the way to go. How do you?
You can't convince people. You have to try it yourself, and then live by example.
Okay, yeah,
that's the only way. Yeah. And they say, "What did you do? You've lost 30 pounds, and you look like a warrior. What did you do?" Because, I gave this talk at a Dynamic Women of Faith Catholic conference. I gave a talk, and then 250 women lined up to shake my hand, which was really lovely, And I had all these women coming up, and they're, all ages of women. And then this one woman comes up, and she stands up. She's like, she shakes my hand, and she says, "Hello. I'm a carnivore. So is my husband, and so are my children. Thank you," and walks off the stage. And I thought that was a completely different creature from all the other women that I shook hands with today. Like that. And the thing is, if we want to set the world right, it isn't about what we want, right? It's not about what we desire. It is about how we can be the most effective people for our loved ones. And part of that, at least a beginning point of that we can control, something we can do, we can change, is to change what we eat and drink. And simplify that. And I know that it sounds almost military simple, like we're going to do this like a soldier. Yeah, well, look at the times. Look what's going on. We have to be sharp. We got to be sharp. The time for like eating Cheetos and sitting in your basement is over. It's over.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's actually, and it actually points directly to the biblical virtue of love, and where people, I've noticed, especially in more liberal areas, are having a difficult time understanding the biblical definition of love compared to the worldly definition of love, right? The worldly definition of love is to affirm. It's primarily to affirm. And the biblical definition of love is the exact opposite. Jesus says there's no greater love than one who's willing to sacrifice their life for their friends. So the root of love is personal sacrifice, right? So to what extent do you take that to? Well, the Christian answer is every extent that you possibly can.
That's right.
Including what you're eating. And it sounds weird because the church doesn't talk about it. Like, at least maybe the Catholics are talking about it, but man, I had never in my life heard a sermon. I have still to this day have never heard a sermon about gluttony or about like how you can, and that's a sin. It's actually a sin. Like you shouldn't be a glutton in anything, but you shouldn't be obese. I mean, you shouldn't be willfully obese. You shouldn't be willfully eating unhealthily, because that's a sin. Your body's a temple. The Bible is clear about this. And pastors,
people need help. People need help, though, because I don't think they can think it through. They have been they have been indoctrinated by eating this ultra-processed diet of ultra-processed carbohydrates, and now they're too foggy to think it through. So we have to help one another. We have to really we have to love our neighbors and to really sound the horn, because like the times are desperate and the confusion is everywhere. And part of that is our diet.
That's what Paul talks about in Ephesians, just about, one of the primary, I think he's primarily talking to men, but of course this is applicable to men and women, to be encouraging. And I think he directs it towards men in Ephesians because men are less encouraging than women are naturally. And so that's not just like be encouraging about just things that you think are Christian, but it's be encouraging about all these things. So like you're saying, that maybe the way to get people to be maybe more on board with this worldview of sacrificing some of the foods and the things that you to hold on to tightly just because it's how you grew up or it's part of your family culture or whatever it is, or just makes you feel comfortable or you just like it. There's a fine line that I'm trying to learn better between just coming down hard on people and then encouraging them. And I think before I had kids, it was easier to come down hard on people because it's like, oh, I don't have to live with you. So I can just kind of like, go off on somebody. And actually you need to do that. Jesus, in some specific places, you need to do that. Like Jesus clearing out the temple. Everybody thought, man, that guy is like out of control. Of course, everybody else was out of control. He was in control. He properly aligned his emotions with the situation that he was in and did the right thing. But having kids for me has been a little bit weird because I've realized that when I come down hard on the kids, even unintentionally, I'm just like, I do it. I'm like, oh, that probably is just completely ineffective. I probably should have just tried to encourage them in a different direction. And so there's this fine line between discipline and encouragement. And I know I'm going on about this, but and so it's weird how do you figure out how to apply these different virtues like discipline and encouragement in different situations with different people. Obviously it comes down to discernment and prudence, but listening. Yeah.
Listening
okay.
is a big one because people will tell you what's on their minds if you listen.
What about kids that can't talk well? What do you do with like little kids?
Well, little kids, it's more in the moment because it has to be in the moment or they can't learn, right? So there has to be a consequence to their behavior.
Okay.
So if they're being good, they need to be rewarded, right? So reward is really important for kids. And the more rewards you give, the more they will do those things that you desire, that you think are good, right? And so then you don't have to but when now and then you're going to have to discipline. And you want to discipline quickly and effectively, right? So say you have a little 2-year-old and you've gone out to a restaurant, and as soon as you put that little 2-year-old in the chair, she doesn't want to be in the chair, and she tells you that, well, then you take her out of the chair. You take her out of the chair and you walk her to the bathroom, I guess, because it's more quiet over there. So you walk her to a place that's more quiet and you put her down and you say, okay, so we're just going to stand here until you want to have a good day, until you want to have a good time in the restaurant. You want to be easy to get along with. You want to be, you want to have your emotions in check and you want to pay attention. Have a good day. Yeah. And then they stand there until they decide. Because for a while they fight with themselves because they don't have control of so then they fight with themselves for a while. And then they will come around and say, okay, Daddy, I want to have a good day. And you know that because it's that beautiful little tender voice that they have when they're being little angels. And then you take them back to the table and you give them a big pat. And when you negotiate what they're going to eat for dinner and they eat it, then you give them a big pat and you do a lot of rewarding. And then the next time they come in, they're going to remember that. And they might still, try this little thing that they've tried because they want to see how much their will can be in control. So they impose it, but then they find out very quickly that, as soon as they impose their will, they're taken out of that situation and they have there's nothing they can do to impose their will. It's not going to happen. So then they start to realize, so if I'm there to listen and to be together with people and to serve, my siblings rather than to despise them, things are going to go well. And you want them to show their love to their siblings. That's how they show their love to you, is they show their love to each other.
Okay, that's very helpful. And I want to know what you think about this because I was in a parenting class at church, a church that I don't go to anymore. And I think there's some relationship between like the incentive structure cannot overshadow or contradict the actual goal. So for instance, we were in a parenting class and one of the parents said, that they started doing, they want to encourage their kids to read their Bibles, right? And so they started doing reading the Bible, and then every time they did that, I think they give them ice cream, or they do ice cream Bible reading, and they're like, the kids love this. It's amazing. And my wife and I were like, I think the kids love the ice cream. I don't know if they really love the Bible, like the Bible aspect of it. And so that's a scenario in which I think the thing that the kids are going after, which is that we want our kids to do, which is reading the Bible, like the thing that we're trying to get them to do that through is actually not good for them in and of itself. Like just eating ice cream is actually really not good for kids, but also it contradicts the very thing that the Bible represents, which is this personal relationship. We're actually talking, we're knowing who God is as we read the Bible. So we shouldn't just we're not like utilitarian. We don't want to create little utilitarian children who are just using God to get ice cream, which I think is what a lot of the non-denominational church is today in America. But so you said like patting them on the back, or like how does that encouragement to actually look that isn't maybe just giving them ice cream or just doing something that's not necessarily healthy for them?
Well,
does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say that I would limit my reward to attention. That's what they want, is attention. Kids will do anything for attention.
Okay.
They'll tie themselves in knots for attention. They'll sacrifice themselves for attention.
They'll do the trans thing is that in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you get a young man who's wearing red stockings and red high heels and a red dress. Do you think he's looking for attention? Maybe.
Yeah.
And it's just gone way too far. But women have left the homes, right? Women have left the homes, and those, because we were told that we've been told we can do anything with our lives, and that we will be fulfilled by our careers. And so women have been led down that path and have left the homes, and they're not even getting married and having children anymore. So
they're depressed at 60.
Like really, really left their homes and their communities. So now the communities are failing, the families are failing, and now the children are failing,
suffering.
Because they are not getting the attention that they need from their mothers and their fathers, because that's what children want. That's what they need. That's what they need, because they have to get feedback from their parents to see if their emotions are in line with what is good. And so they always look to you to see when they have a little tantrum or they have a meltdown or something. They look to you to see, was that appropriate or was that not appropriate? And they're expecting an answer. But if it's a different person that they're looking to all the time, then they're not going to get those answers, and they're not going to understand themselves. And then they're going to start to think that maybe they should be maybe if I was a boy, I'd be more understood.
Yeah. Huh. And maybe my parents would even take more notice of me. Abigail Schreier wrote that book, Irreversible Damage.
Yeah.
And she talked a little bit about, and so my wife read it. And so her and I talked through the book. I didn't actually read it yet, but this is what I understand from what my wife told me. That basically there's a rebellious streak in teenage kids and just kids in general. There's this rebellious streak, and they want to rebel against their parents. And so if you go back, to the 50s or 40s, it's like you smoke a cigarette or you drink a beer, and that's kind of like how they rebelled against their parents. And as time has gone on, that rebellion has grown and grown. I think probably in relationship to the rise in gentle parenting, and gentle parenting is just not parenting as far as I'm concerned. So in the rise of just letting your kids do whatever they want, the kids have tried to rebel in more serious ways, because it seems like the rebellion is you're pushing up against this boundary to see if your parents actually really love you enough to tell you no. And the thing that I've just been so frustrated with the church, evangelical church, there's so many evangelical churches. So the biggest church in Madison, the biggest evangelical church in Madison is huge. They do this thing that they call, what is it called? Gender hospitality. Have you heard of that?
No.
it's for kids. In the youth group, they call the kids what pronouns they want to be called.
Oh my goodness.
Which is right. There's a lot of different reasons why this is wrong. The main one, the main biblical reason is because it's lying, and you shouldn't lie to kids, especially. And Jesus says, it'd be better if somebody were to tie a millstone around your neck and throw you into the sea than for you to lead a child astray. So this is a serious, serious problem, and it shouldn't be tolerated. But it's been just depressing to see how that has totally made its way into the church. This sort of parenting model of just let the kid do whatever they want instead of saying no. And I see that my generation really, I think, is desiring for somebody to love them enough to say, no, you can't do that. I'm going to help you learn how to do the right thing, which is what I know, like Jordan has talked about this in some of his stuff, but I think that's why, one of the reasons, not maybe why he got so famous, is because it felt like he was speaking up and saying, actually, if you stand straight up and you put your shoulders back and you kind of align yourself with the truth and reality, one, your life's going to be better. But in some ways, he was saying no to what the world was telling a lot of these young men to do. And the young men, I think, were gravitating towards that because their parents never said no to them. And I think no is a word that's helpful for sinful people. Like for myself, like we're sinners. I'm a sinner. I need God. Christ needs to say no to me because I'm going to do the bad thing. And I can know that he loves me because he's saying no to me out of a desire for me to be in union with him, which is a good and beautiful thing. And so I guess that's just a long way of saying, I think it's been very sad to see how my generation subconsciously has been desiring for their parents to just say no. And the parents have been oddly pushing back on that, saying, I'm not going to tell you no, I'm just going to give you what you want. And they take it to the extent of transgender. I'm going to change my gender. Like, tell me no, please. And then they don't do it. And then they change their gender and they don't ruin their life because they can be redeemed. Yeah, they do. They do. But they can, what I mean is, Christ can redeem even the transgender person, not maybe not in the physical world, but in the spiritual sense. But you're right.
Their childhood, I guess. You could say.
Yes, you're right about that. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And so it's a really sad. It's just a sad thing. Like why can the church not figure this thing out? But like,
well, the church has been wanting to be liked.
Yeah, I know. It's annoying.
Yeah, well, that doesn't work. You can't. It doesn't matter if you're liked or not.
How do you know this? You're like, I know that but you're like just newly into Catholicism. How can you figure this out? But all of the theologians and pastors who have been claim to be Christians for 30, 40, 50 years, who are compromising on all of these biblical doctrines, can't figure this out. And obviously you have a life of wisdom, so I understand that as well. But like, how is it that these other people can't figure this out? You might not have the answer to that, but I guess
I think that Jordan and I, when we first got married, when we were going to get married, he said, you're going to have to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And if you don't agree, we can't be married.
Mm-hmm.
And I went home for 6 months and thought about it. No one had ever said that to me before.
Sure.
And so then I went back to him. I said, yeah, I've decided, like, let's do this. Tell the truth. And so that was always what was called on. It was always called on to tell the truth. And sometimes it would take us 3 days to work through something that we had learned probably as children through our childhood family. And now we were married, and you bring all of those ideas to your marriage, and then you have to reorganize everything and throw out what didn't work and build what you think is going to be good. And so to be good and truthful was really what was at the basis of our marriage. And and it still took us a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a long time.
Yeah.
And Jordan, although he had all of that, we didn't go to church, right?
Yeah.
And so he was as indoctrinated as everybody.
Huh.
But he had read enough that he knew that he had to make important distinctions. And one of them was between falsehood and being truthful. He knew that was paramount. That was definitely something that he had to hold on to. And so I think, and so then I learned really from Jordan and my relationship and all the troubles that we've been through and raising kids. He was pretty good with children. He had a good mother and father. And so, and he was oldest in his family. I was youngest. I didn't know anything about raising kids. So that helped quite a bit. But we really worked together, and I stayed at home with my kids too. Although I did other things, because I told you I was an artist and a massage therapist, I could kind of do what I wanted to do in my time that I had, which wasn't very much when they were napping, and be with my kids. And so I made sure we made sure we bought a house close to a school so they could come home for lunch.
Really?
Wow. Yeah. So we made that easy, but the schools were starting to really fall apart when our kids were about grade 3 and 4. They were starting to be indoctrinated by ideology. The principle, everybody's a winner, and
oh my gosh. Yeah.
Right. So there was that at the beginning with sports. Like I think my son in grade 6, they won the citywide hockey, which was big because it was Toronto. It was a big city. And the principal got on the intercom and said, "Everyone's a winner." And
no,
now my kids are in their 30s.
Yeah.
So that was a long time ago. So the school system has been falling apart, but now it's pretty hard to find a good school now. Pretty hard to find a good school.
Yeah, it's totally. I mean, Madison has been progressive for a long, long time. So I went to the public schools as a kid who grew up in a conservative Christian family, and it was a disaster. We looked. This is like embarrassing, but I don't really care because I don't think they teach anybody anything. I call the public schools the intellectual Auschwitz because I think that's what it is. That you go there to get your intellect murdered, and you go there to learn how to not think. And I was always rebellious, and we talked about my personality things a little bit, and it was really hard to learn how to manage that in the era of tolerance and all these weird things as a Christian in these major progressive schools that I went to. And so I was applying for a college a couple months back because I don't have a degree, and so I was like, I need to get my high school transcript. And I knew that was going to be bad, but I didn't know how bad it was going to be because, man, I just didn't go. My senior year, I skipped 150 classes and they wouldn't let me walk at graduation, which I wasn't going to go anyways. So it didn't bother me.
That sucks.
And I got my transcripts, and I was telling because my wife graduated from the University of Madison, Wisconsin with a civil engineering degree, but she only uses it she goes to work like once a week and then stays home with the kids. And then that week we're trying to do our best with the limited money that we have to stay home with the kids. I don't want to send them to any institution because I think they're my responsibility and Andrea's responsibility, my wife. And I get the transcripts back and I'm like, I had like a 1.8 GPA in high school. It was the most ridiculous.
Wow.
It was horrible. Yeah. And it's like a badge of honor.
I don't know if that's horrible or not. I really
It's terrible.
Don't. Yeah, maybe it's terrible. 4.0 it's a terrible idea, but I don't think you would have learned anything there anyway. So
agreed. Yeah. And actually in the last 5 years, I've read more than I've ever read in my life. And I find myself to be somebody who loves learning, but just did not. The public school system, I was just like, this is ridiculous.
Have you looked at Peterson Academy? Have you looked at that?
And yes. And my wife and I are discussing, if I should do that because
sure, do it. It's $500, I think, for the year. So,
and we need to.
I'd be interested if it was good.
No, I think it looks amazing. Stephen Hicks is one of the teachers on there, and I interviewed him about a year ago, and he's awesome. And they have a lot of really good teachers. We have to save up for that, which is no problem because it's not really very expensive. But then 2, the thing that I really want, and maybe they can add this one day, I'm sure it's not on their priority list, is Greek. I want to learn Greek so that I can read the Bible. the New Testament, at least. I want to learn Hebrew as well, but Greek is really important. But anyways, we've been really talking about that, so I actually might do that.
Yeah, well, we're trying to find, we know of a very good humanities, one of the best humanities teachers. We're trying to convince him to do some lectures. So
seriously,
yeah.
On
and
Greek?
Well, he teaches Greek.
Really?
Yeah. So we'll see when that happens. Hopefully soon.
Yeah. So that is something, but yeah. So yeah, I had horrible grades in high school. But I was going to ask, because you did mention that you guys didn't go to church when you and Jordan didn't go to church. What has it been like? I've wondered this as I've heard him talk about God, and in the Exodus series, and in his Genesis series, and just how he generally speaks about God. And then you're Catholic, so there's a lot more. The way that I see Jordan talk about God, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong here, that God is a spirit, which I think is true. But he also sometimes talks about God as to conceptualize him as the future in some capacity, which I don't necessarily agree with. So the Catholic faith is catechized. There's a specific doctrinal set. You've got catechisms and confessions and things like that you have to hold to if you want to actually be part of the Catholic faith. It doesn't seem to me like Jordan's theological perspective is in line with the Catholic theological perspective. Well, first off, is that correct? Second, how is that? Has your marriage been affected in any way, positively or negatively, by your full-on conversion into Catholicism? And his exploration of the Bible, but not necessarily him saying, I'm a Catholic or I'm Eastern Orthodox. He's kind of in this, I don't know, just it seems like he's exploring things, which I think is awesome. So, yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, he is exploring things, that's for sure. And I think he wants to be in a position for people to listen, for anyone to listen and to find their way. He's completely on board with my exploration of the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
And he will come to Mass with me if I
Really?
ask him to. Yeah, he will come to Mass with me if I ask him to. And so wow. I think that my observance of the faith will be helpful to him.
And okay, well, that's interesting. And he's interacting with Jonathan Pajot, who's Eastern Orthodox. So that's a whole different ballgame in and of itself. I wanted to know why I think I heard in a different podcast, maybe your grandparent, your grandma, or was it your mom? Somebody in your family.
My great-grandmother was Polish Catholic.
Yeah.
I remember her when I was a little girl. She was 104. So she was in a nursing home already, so she was old. But I remember her. And my grandmother was quite a deep thinker. She left Catholicism and went to Protestantism, but I didn't know that. So I was born into the Protestant faith. But when I became a Catholic, I had a conversation. I asked my priest. I said, I'm having back problems. My husband is on tour and he's not feeling well, and my daughter is having some relationship troubles with her ex-husband. And so my priest said, why don't you call this young Mexican priest? He's a good friend of mine.
Sure.
And he's in Newfoundland. And so I call him and he's wearing like a down-filled coat in June, and he said, God sent me here. I don't know for how long. But then he started praying in Spanish, so I couldn't really understand what he was saying. And he said, your grandmother is with you. And he said, are you close to your grandmother? I said, well, I was close to both my grandmothers. And he said, well, your grandmother is with you. And that same week, I had forgotten, but that same week, my brother, who's older than me, 8 years older than me, and my sister is 5 years older than me. So they knew more about things in the family than I did because I was so much younger. And nobody told me all that stuff that they were learning. So we were organizing that, and my brother and sister talked about how my parents didn't baptize us. My grandmother did. So I phoned her and I said, which grandmother? baptized us. I knew probably which one, but which one? It was my mother's mother, who was Polish.
Oh,
And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? And I'm just like I'm drawing conclusions after the fact, but why did my grandmother baptize us? I think she left the Catholic faith when she was about 20, and she started going to a Protestant church. And all I heard was that she thought the dogma was too restrictive, so she was doing the liberal thing. She was going more liberal, like everybody was going more liberal. And
sure.
And my mother was a Protestant, but I think that my grandmother had taught her that religion could be discounted somehow. And so my mother never baptized us. And when my grandmother came to visit and found out none of us were baptized, I think she felt guilty.
Sure.
And she took us all to church and got us baptized.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Yeah. So,
and so when I went to church when I was little, I was looking for Mother Mary, and she wasn't prominent in the church, and I wondered why. And so I think that my Catholic heritage was stronger in me than I knew. And so when I was kind of deciding between Orthodoxy and Catholicism when I was going to choose a church.
Okay.
Because I really, Scripture was what I was interested in. And both of those faiths are very strong in Scripture. But the woman who brought me a rosary in the hospital was Catholic.
Oh, yeah.
She was a Catholic woman. And the only really Orthodox person I knew was Jonathan Pajot. And although I think he's a wonderful person, and I really admire what he talks about, I didn't really have any local person who was accessible to me.
Sure. Yeah.
But I did in Catholicism, and so that's the way I went. I decided, well, this door is opening. This door is opening for me. I think I should walk through this door. And so that's why I chose Catholicism. And my friend who offered me the rosary, she was the one who came with me to the church. And she actually found a priest who would follow me on the road because I was traveling all the time for the catechism. And so he did. He followed me, and we had Zoom calls once a week throughout the year. And then I was fortunate enough to come home and be brought into Catholic Church at that church through him. So that was very good. Yeah, it was. And he asked, they ask you when you join the church if you have any reservations or what your reservations are. I had no reservations. I had none.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Absolutely none. No, I was pretty.
Yeah.
My experience, with telling my son that I was going to die, and then seeing his grief and feeling all my doubt. I felt all my doubt leave my body. I felt something leave my body that I have come to understand may have been doubt and cynicism, I think, probably, from when I was a child. You have experiences in your youth that you generalize, and I generalized to all authority. I can't trust authority, so I never voted when I was young, and so I did some of these things. But I think some of that, even though I had become married and raised my kids and stayed home with them and did the things I was supposed to do, that doubt continued to be a part of me. At that moment, it left me, and I felt the peace of God fill my body. And then I told my son that God only knew when I was going to die, that the doctors didn't know. And so because of that moment, and then because this woman, Queenie Yu, brought me a rosary, and I began to pray it. And I already had a yoga practice that was a daily practice. So I just turned that into a prayer practice. I gave up yoga and I started to pray. At this point, I needed something much more profound than this Eastern philosophy that I was not born into and only understood intellectually. This was really deep in my heritage, and it spoke to me. It speaks to me now.
And that's, man, that's interesting. So one, that's like, well, thinking through that, because obviously I'm coming from it's weird. I obviously come from the Protestant perspective, but so it's okay. So did you ever have any sort of inclination towards Protestantism, or it seems like from what I've listened to in other podcasts that you've done, there's two primary attractions. I don't know if that's the right word. You can correct it if you don't think it is, but one was Mary and the Catholic understanding of Mary, and then the other thing it seems like was the heritage, your family heritage, and those two things in some ways converging under the Catholic theological conviction.
Yep, that's right. That's correct. That's correct. That's definitely correct. And it's just been interesting since I made those decisions to find out that my grandmother had been Catholic and had changed our religion to Protestantism, which I didn't know growing up. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that until I had made these decisions. So it wasn't that my family was Catholic. I didn't know that. It was more an intuition. Yeah. It was an intuition that I had. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know what's going to happen with Jordan. I don't know. I hope that, he finds and I know that he has had heartfelt, personal experiences with God. I know that from the time he was maybe 23 years old. Wow. But he's an intellectual, right? So he's coming from this place, and he wants to talk to everyone. He wants to talk to the atheists, right? Right. And he's having some good response there too, that people are coming to the faith. And so I'm not going to comment on his journey because I don't know. I don't know about his journey. I'm willing to support him in his journey, and he's willing to support me in mine. Mm-hmm. It sounds like, did you have something else to say? Sorry. Well, who knows if we'll stay in the Catholic Church, because if he decided he was going to go to the Orthodox Church, I'd go with him. Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. That's okay. Well, that reminds me of C.S. Lewis and his kind of conversion to, well, he became Anglican, and I think that Tolkien might have not been too happy about that. But hey, Tolkien did the hard work of getting him into the Christian faith at the very least. And he wrote his first Christian book that he wrote was The Pilgrim's Regress. I don't know if you've read that. Have you? No, I haven't. Man, it's such a good book. It's in the style of allegory, obviously like Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. And he talks about how Lewis in his 20s is going through this he starts, the character is John, and John starts in Puritania. Puritania is this I suppose it would be considered maybe today to be like the fundamentalists who in a lot of ways just believe whatever God says and doesn't really ask any questions. So this is just what God says to do, and we don't ask questions. And so there was this character called the landlord, and they all got to live on the landlord's land, but the landlord had all these rules and they couldn't disobey the rules, and if they asked questions about the rules, they get in trouble. Anyways, this character John then one day ventures out into the woods, and he meets this girl, and this girl is kind of they call her the brown girl, and people are like, oh, that's racist. It's not racist. She's a representation of the South, the romantic South, the Renaissance South, and so the complexion of her skin is a representation of that. It's not a race thing like everybody thinks, and so he starts to like have sex with this girl, and he starts going out in the woods and having sex with this girl. And you're kind of like, what is going on here? This is a bizarre story. And so then he comes back one day, and the brown girl comes out to him, and they have this relationship, but it's purely sexual. And he thinks that that's just all it's going to be. And then from behind the trees, all these little brown girls, all these little children come out. And as I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most terrifying thing ever. And he's like, he's scared. The character John is like, what is going on here? And she's like, oh, John, you didn't think that there were consequences to your actions? And so he runs away, and he never goes back, but he also can't stay in Puritania. And he has this vision in his head of this island, this like beautiful island that he longs for. And he felt like he was finding it in some way
in the brown in the woods with the brown girl, but that ended up not being what he wanted. So he goes on this journey. He says, I'm leaving Puritania, and he goes on this journey. And essentially the journey is this character, John, who is C.S. Lewis. It's C.S. Lewis's testimony, coming across all of the different philosophies of the world as he then comes to know Christ. And so the interesting thing is, like, he comes across Mr. Enlightenment. This is one of my favorite parts of the book. He comes across Mr. Enlightenment first, and he talks to Mr. Enlightenment a little bit. And he's like, oh, that's interesting. And he's traveling with this companion in Virtue at some point as well. But anyways, he comes across Mr. Enlightenment. Then later on in the book, he comes across Mr. Enlightenment's son. And Mr. Enlightenment's son thinks that his dad, Mr. Enlightenment, is such an idiot, because that's kind of how the Enlightenment worked. And so he's on this path, and he's talking to all these different personifications of different philosophies, right? And then he gets to this point where he's at the edge of a cliff. And when he looks north, that cliff that just goes on and on and on north. And when he looks south, the cliff goes on and on south. And he travels up, and as he travels up, he travels into rationalism. And you get to the top of it, and it's like this, like, totalitarian, just very rationalistic. And as he travels south, he goes to Romanticism. It's different philosophies that are on the spectrum of different representation. On this spectrum, they are different degrees of these of rationalism and whatever. And so he wants to get across this canyon, but he can't. And so there's this little old lady sitting in the center. Her name is Mother Kirk. And she says, I can take you across. And he's like, no, you can't. You're a little old lady. You can't do anything. And so he goes up and down and end up essentially, and he's always searching for this vision in his head of this beautiful island. Hopefully you read it. The book's been around long enough that I feel like I can spoil it a little bit. It's been around for a long time. Mother Kirk is the church. And so she can take him across the canyon, but she's not what he expected her to look like, right? You expect the thing that could take you across the canyon to actually be, well, like, I don't know, like a rocket ship or something, but not
you recognize even.
Yeah. So anyways, I just, as you were talking about how Jordan likes to talk to all these different people, it just reminded me of that book. And it is, and just C.S. Lewis himself had to talk. He had to discuss the different ways of looking at this, at the world, with all of these different ideologies and philosophies and worldviews and theologies. And of course, like, the thing that brings him to faith in Christ is Tolkien convincing him that with all these other myths, like, well, those are all representations of something true, but they aren't what Tolkien calls the one true myth, which is Christ and Christianity and the gospel. And so, anyways, that just brought that up into my head. So it's an interesting thing. It's been interesting to see how he's moved in particular directions, and then it seems like a ton of other people with him are just like trying to figure this out as well. And then you move into Catholicism. I guess I'll ask you this, and then we can wrap it up if you want. You moved past, so I guess I would say it this way: you moved past Protestantism. Now, it's because those two maybe like converging intuitions, with Mary and your family heritage coming together, and you felt like it come to, and maybe God's providence, and it seems like the door was just open. And so have you ever, I don't know, what do you think about Protestantism? Was there a reason that you were just maybe not very much interested in it? Because it feels like Catholicism and even Eastern Orthodoxy, it's like, whoa, like that's high up, like that's high church. And those two are very much different from Protestantism. Somebody said to me, there's not a big difference between Catholicism and Protestantism. And I was like, well, there's 5 sacraments that are different. That's like quite a few. And there's a lot of other differences, but did you not look into Protestantism, or what do you think about it?
Well, I had such a profound experience that it felt to me like it was upon it, that the onus was upon me to give myself completely to God and to the service of fellow man. And I have a very strong self-will, right? And it brought me to destruction in the end, but it served me well and then brought me to destruction, I would say. And I can't, well, if I'm going to really tame myself and lasso myself and, send me in the right direction, I need strict scripture and guidance with no, it's a very thin path that I have to follow. And I know that now. It's ridiculously, it's so thin I can't see it, and I can't veer off that path. And so I feel that I need a lot of help. And I get a lot of help through people who are really paying very close attention to the Bible. Yeah. And I need all that help. And plus, Jordan, he has he's doing very important work, and I want to be helpful. So I have to be really careful. And also, our societies, not just ours, are in such odds with one another that I want to be whatever help I can be. And so I really have to be very, very, very careful. That's what I think. I just have to be very, very careful. There's no room for tolerance here. None.
Yeah. I mean, the way that you're talking, I'm like, that's exactly what I think. And I've moved from non-denominationalism to Anglicanism. But for me, that I find that the heritage of a high church is incredibly helpful in theological formation. So I think that that's absolutely important. And then, but I think that maybe one of the differences between the Protestants and Catholics, just in terms of temperament or predisposition, is just I don't, and it's probably, I don't know. Let's say it and see what it is. It's probably, I guess the difference is that I just feel like I need to figure it out I don't necessarily want everybody telling me, I want to read through all of the theological things and then be like, okay, yeah, that one makes the most sense to me. Whereas the Catholics, I think they have the rigid system, like you're talking about, the rigid perspective, which is really the structured perspective. And it's really helpful. And not to say that they don't do their own theologizing. Of course, they come to those conclusions through doing their own theologizing. But I've been trying to think through, other than the doctrinal differences, which I think are significant between the Reformed Protestants and Catholics. What is it about the structural differences that are driving a lot of young people, I think, to Catholicism rather than to Protestantism, which as a Protestant bothers me, but as a Catholic,
I don't know. What do you think? Because there's got to be more ritual in the Anglican Church than there is in the Protestant, right? And that's helpful. So I think in the Catholic Church, there's more ritual. And and also it took me some learning even to go to Mass. I didn't understand exactly what everything was about, and it took me some time. So it's a little bit complicated to start going to Mass as an adult, and not just being born into it and understanding it right from the beginning. But I'm willing to learn, and I think that people who are looking to the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church or the Anglican Church, for that matter, I think that it's good, because I think we've been given so much leeway that we need something to tie ourselves to. And these rituals, we can tie ourselves to these rituals, which will bring us to God throughout the day. And I also have a daily spiritual program, so that I, like I said, the first thing I do is turn to God in the morning, and then I pray. And then during the day, if I have any challenges during the day, then I can go back to prayer. I can go back to prayer to center myself again, because I want to be effective, and I don't want to be veered off. I don't want to veer off the path just because something happened that I was not expecting. I want to be able to bring myself back to the path as quickly as I can, so that I don't waste any time or anybody else's time. And then at night, to be mindful of what I've done during the day, and if there's anyone to apologize to, or anything to straighten out, that I can do that before I go to sleep, so that the next morning when I wake up, I can be as effective as I can be again. And so it's a daily practice. And so it starts best with Mass. But if I don't have Mass in the morning, then I have the Rosary, which is good, right? It's good because it gives me armor for the day.
Sure. Yeah. And so I think there's a couple of thoughts that ran through my head, and I don't want to so tell me if I don't want to be insulting to the Catholic faith. I'm not trying to be insulting. I think this is great. I actually listen to Michael Knowles every day, and he's my favorite political commentator. I love him. And I think he's got his head on straight. I think he's probably a Christian. And I think so. I read the doctrine, right? I'm reading the Catholic doctrine, and I have major issues with it. So it's hard for me to make any definitive statement on the Catholics, but I genuinely do think there are legitimate, real Catholic Christians who are absolutely saved. And that's a controversial thing to say as a Reformed Protestant person, because there are some people who don't think that there are any, and it's a difficult thing to theologically work yourself through. Now, one thing that I would wonder is, and tell me if you've thought through this at all. I think that the big difference is that there is the goodness of ritual and conforming yourself to the rituals of the faith. And I think that's amazing and good. And actually, that's why I'm Anglican, because the liturgy is so helpful and it's so clear. And it's this is what we believe. And here's the catechism, here's the confession. And this is what you have to believe to be a Christian. Whereas in non-denominational churches, it's you just have to believe whatever the pastor tells you to believe. And that could change next week, which drives me crazy. And so there's no structure, and I think it's authoritarian, and it becomes that way because that's how people become now.
It's even getting atheistic, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's not even Christian in a lot of scenarios. It's totally.
But I think that's the end result of Protestantism.
Okay. Those are fighting words.
They are, aren't they?
I don't think that it is. I don't think that it is, because let me explain. So in the Old Testament, you have the Jewish people who are the form of governing the governmental form isn't necessarily working out in a lot of scenarios. And they say, we want a king like all of the other countries, all of the other civilizations. They all have kings. We want a king. And God's no, I am your king. What could you possibly want that's more than me? Of course, if I give you a king, it's going to fall apart, which it does fall apart. Even the first one is Saul is not that good of a king, right? And then David is great, but then David totally screws up. And then Solomon, he's awesome. And then he's also got 700 wives. You're dude, what are you doing? And then it just falls apart from there. You got a couple good ones. So I think that's something that's happening in the Catholic and Orthodox Church, and this is going to insult Catholic and Orthodox, is that there's a desire for the king, that I think negates in a lot of situations personal conviction and personal holiness and personal godliness. I think that is the Protestant. That's the Protestant distinction, in that I totally agree with you. I think one of the end results of the Protestant faith is it can produce this just ever schisming church, in which people are just constantly breaking off, and then churches are just constantly becoming more liberal because the authoritative structures are just basically diluted down to nothing except for one pastor. And then you have non-denominational churches which have a turnover rate of 40 or 50 years. They don't last for longer than that, because whenever the pastor either quits or has an affair, it's over, because people have followed the cult of personality rather than the Jesus Christ himself. And so the structure of churches, I think, try to do a better job of making sure you follow Christ. But what I think happens with the Catholic Church is that they fall into what the Jews fall into, and what Galatians talks about clearly is legalism in some capacity, that the adding of doctrines to the biblical faith. Now, this will get into a deeper conversation, because the Catholics have extra books in the Apocrypha, and so they believe they believe God's word is even more than what the Protestants think in the 66 books, compared to, I think it's 73 in the Catholic Church. And so I know that creates theological distinctions in and of itself, but then they also have theological perspectives on the priest being kind of the continuation of the ascended Christ. And that's why they can't get married, and why they can forgive sins. Whereas, the Protestant perspective would be, well, in Hebrews, it says Christ is the great high priest, and And so I only have him to answer to. And so all that to say, Protestantism, I think what Luther did was good. He goes to Rome and he sees, oh, why are all the priests at the brothels? This seems, I've given my life to this institution, and now this is like a sham. And so he calls it out, and then he brings us back to justification through faith by grace. And I'm not saying the Catholic Church didn't readjust after that. I think they did in some essence, but do you think that there's a way in which the Catholic Church can fall into legalism, in that they add certain rituals that aren't actually that are just not meant for the Christian faith?
Well, there's the South American Catholicism that was brought on by the communists. What's that called? Theology? No. What's it called? Theosophy? Theosophy? What's it called?
Theophany? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was not a good move.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That was not good. So yes, definitely. So, and we're all sinners.
Yeah.
All of us, the priests too, everybody. We're all sinners, and we're going to make mistakes. And that was one of the reasons that I left the church, was because it was not perfect. And the people in it weren't perfect. Mm-hmm. So why would I want to be a part of that? That was my excuse, right? But that's not an excuse, because my allegiance is to God.
Yeah.
It's not to the priest or to the church. I am grateful for the priest, and grateful for the church, and grateful for the people in the church and all of the parishioners. I'm grateful for all of them, because at some point I might need them.
Yeah.
And I probably won't need them at all for most of the time. But one day I'm going to need them. And I'm going to need them like right now. And I'm going to have to know my way there. Because it'll be too late for me to find my way there.
Sure. Right.
And so I'm grateful for them to be there. And also for myself to be there if anybody else needs to come.
Yeah.
And it needs to get on their knees, right? Needs to come there, and in humility give themselves to Christ. I have to be there for that, and that's what we all have to be there for. But we're all broken, and so is the church. But that isn't the point.
Well, that's
that's not the point.
Yeah.
And I know they're not. And they're flowering things up all the time and trying to but for what purpose, right? So they can go down in history, so there's all of these sinful ways that everybody is a part of. But that's why we have this ideal that we pray to, is because there is this fringe around the ideal where we all hang out, where everybody, but that doesn't mean that there's not a necessity for the ideal. And so we go there to admit there's an ideal.
Yeah. That's actually a refreshing answer, because obviously that's not just, you're not the only one who, growing up in the church, you have that same, these people are terrible. Why am I doing this? And
I might well leave, right? Let's go drink some beer. Yeah.
Right. The world seems a lot easier, and everybody seems a little bit nicer. And what I think people realize is that everybody in the world, maybe it is easier in a way, but probably not. And also, they don't, everybody's a little bit shallower as well. And there is a depth to the Christian faith and to faith in general that isn't in the secular world, because the secular world is built on kind of a morally relativistic world presupposition. And so that's, well, it is good to hear that, though, because, because I think a lot of people are wanting to, are tempted to leave the church because they see the hypocrisy in the church. And it's the whole idea behind that is, somewhat arrogant, because if I join the church, it's going to get worse in a lot of ways. Right. And so I should just be careful before just being super critical of everything. Now, there are times in which criticism is absolutely a necessity in the church, in which, like Luther, I think, did a service not only to the what would become the Protestant Church, but I think he did a service to the Catholic Church. I think there were things that the Catholic Church had to fix, and that they ended up fixing in some capacity after that. And so that was a good thing, but the criticism has to be careful, and it has to be, make sure that it's doctrinal and biblical. And so it is, it's refreshing to hear that, because I don't know, I guess whenever I've talked to Catholics, I haven't heard as much of the emphasis on the sinfulness, the sinfulness of man, as much as the emphasis on the dependency on the church. And that just might be where people will say, I went to the church, the Catholic Church, because I needed more structure, which I think is good. But it sounds like you're saying, yes, the structure is helpful, but in reality, like, I'm a sinful person, and the structures are helping me stay on the straight and narrow, rather than just making me feel comfortable because it's structured. And I think those are two different ways of looking at things.
No, I wouldn't say that the structure has ever made me comfortable.
Okay.
I don't know. It's been difficult for me to give into structure.
I'm that way too. I have to pretty much get on my knees to be a part of structure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that
but that's good for
disagreeableness?
me. It's good for me, because then I can see, I have a better viewpoint of the world.
Is that due to disagreeableness?
Yeah, partly.
It is.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And my dad was very disagreeable. So he taught me, he said, Tam, when I was a teenager, he would say, you're going to go out with your friends, and you guys are going to drive, because I was from way far up north. You're going to drive 30 miles to a dance, and then everybody's going to get drunk.
Yeah.
But you're going to come home. You need to come home.
Mm-hmm.
That's all he said to me. You need to find your way home. So I used to sit by the driver and keep the car on the road, because he would never give me a car.
Wow.
So that I could get home, because there were lots of dugouts. There are lots of farmers. And so everybody had a dugout, and they put the dugout right by the highway. So if you went off the highway, you went into water. And so there were drunk people who died in the dugouts because they drove off the highway. So it was kind of a dicey drive home all the time. But I made sure I stayed sober because I needed to get home.
Yeah.
He didn't say you can't go. He was just a disagreeable guy, but he gave us our individual freedom, but he didn't teach me, when he was an old guy, he was like, I read the Bible when I was a kid. Did he share that with us? No. He didn't share that with us. We had to find our own way. But whatever, so life is hard, and we don't always get an easy help up.
Yeah.
We have to find our way, but it is up to us to find our way. And to be grateful when we get there.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's probably a good way to end it. We've talked about so many different things, but I really appreciate you taking this time to talk, because
it was easy to talk to you. Thanks for the invitation.